All right, so welcome everybody, and this is the second attempt at the Fix Your Vocal Break workshop. So thanks for joining me. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what causes the vocal break. And we're going to talk about the signs that we often kind of overlook, the little red flags that our voices are telling us that tell us that we're kind of past that point at which we should have made those little tiny minute adjustments along the way to prevent that break from happening. So the first thing I'm going to say is that the vocal break sounds different for everybody. So for some of us, it does sound like an actual full-on break where the voice just kind of cracks. For some, it sounds like yodeling. For others, it just kind of flips. It flips into like a falsetto or an airy kind of sound. For me, I didn't have a break like most people. Mine was just this weak spot on my E4 and E5, down lower in the scale because I have a very light voice and I was somebody who kind of breaks early for a long, long time. So it was just this section of my range where it didn't break. It just sounded weak. It's like I couldn't get any power out of it no matter what. So I tried to avoid it at all costs. So I would change the keys to my songs to like anywhere I didn't have to sit on those notes for any length of time. And of course, we know that that's really limiting. And a lot of singers do a lot of things like that, where they adjust the keys to their songs to avoid it. They rewrite the melodies to songs, where they'll sing a harmony part instead of singing the lead line, just to kind of cover up the fact that they're really struggling through this section of the range. They do other things like they really push a lot of heavy chest voice and they really dig into the sound a lot and they do crazy things to the vowels. They modify them really dramatically, really drastically to try to cover up this break or to delay it. And so, I mean, I think we all know that it's just limiting. It's limiting technically and artistically. It just doesn't give us much of a choice. So we want to be able to have a range or a scale that is flexible and that we can choose to sing whatever we want whenever we want it, and that's really ultimately the goal for mastering our vocal technique. Any thoughts or questions before we go on? Any personal anecdotes? All right.
I think, as you know, I am very similar. Can you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
I put these in because last time my audio was messing with your vocal.
Oh.
I've had a very similar issue, but I wondered what you obviously were happy singing above and below that area, but was your voice above it? What quality of tone did you have on the G, A, B, say?
I was an M2 singer.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I was.
Yeah, but not a head voice. Like it doesn't sound like head voice. It sounds like some people describe it as like a middle head voice, like some classical singers. That's why oftentimes in the past, like classical singers would describe it as like a middle register for females, even though technically it's like an M2 vibratory pattern. And tell me, Jamie, if it's like
what is that?
Taught me. Sorry.
What is M2?
So M1 is associated with chest voice, let's say, and then M2 with head voice. And it really refers to the unique vibrational patterns of the vocal folds in each register. So when we're in M1, it's a thicker vocal fold mass. There's more muscle involved, more thyroarytenoid muscle, like the muscular body of the vocal folds. And they have a very specific pattern. The mucosal wave operates a certain way when the vocal folds are vibrating with each other. But then when you get into M2, it has a different, there's a different thickness of the vocal folds because they're stretched and a little thinner. You're using a little less muscle mass. So it's kind of a more contemporary way of saying chest voice and head voice.
Yeah.
For me, because I'm a light singer and I'm somebody who grew up always thinking singing has to be sweet and pretty, and I don't want to disturb anybody with my noise. It comes from like early, just experiences with, criticism and things like that. Just so I was just always sweet and pretty, and so I always bridged at my lower passaggio at E. It was just this is where I wanted to go. If I tried, my first teacher tried getting me, and he's a classical based teacher, but he sang all different styles. He tried getting me to carry chest voice up higher, but I would get to F and F sharp and G, and it was painful, and it was just, it never felt good, it never sounded good, and there was no concept of a mix, which Jamie, we already had a workshop on the mixed voice, talking about sort of trying to find that place where it does kind of seem to sit between the two registers.
Totally feel that. Yeah.
And so like we're going to be doing a belting workshop, which I know you've also signed up for, and a lot of that's going to be based on more of a mixed voice and a really heavy chest yell kind of coordination. But we'll get into that in the next workshop. So what was I saying? Yeah, so I was bridging early. I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Oh, we were talking M2 versus M1?
Right. So yeah, so I define the passaggio differently. So the passaggio, if you're talking like it really comes from classical. For most of us females, that lower passaggio is around E, F, F sharp. That's the point at which the voice starts to make acoustical adjustments. There are slight physiological adjustments that take place. But if we don't kind of go along with those adjustments and make those adjustments chromatically, these graduated adjustments, what happens is we get a break at A, B flat, B. So we're all females here, so this is pretty much applicable to all of us. So the break to me is a symptom. It's a symptom of things being out of balance in the notes leading up to it. And oftentimes, generally speaking, we will tend to bridge around the break. Most singers will carry up a heavier production up until this A, B flat, B area. Unless they're belting, they might want to belt a little bit higher to maybe a D or E or something with a heavier production. But most of us will tend to bridge. So we have to find some way to make that break less noticeable and to sort of pass that proverbial baton between M1 and M2, between chest voice and head voice, in a way that's seamless, right? That's effortless and seamless and creates that auditory illusion that we're still singing in one register. And I think that to me is the critical thing. I think when we listen to really, really good singers who don't seem to have a vocal break, it's either because they're cheating through it, like we've talked about before, right? I'm just going to sing falsetto here, but I'm going to sing full voice here. And you just never really notice that they have a break. Or they've mastered this art of auditory illusion, creating that illusion that we're just in one register. And stop me at any point if you want to, and you're welcome to mute yourself. We're going to do a little bit of singing in a bit, and everybody just kind of mutes themselves so they can sing along, and then you're welcome to sing for me if you want me to listen to something. Pretty flexible. So I know, Janet, we've talked about this in a Singwise Academy lesson, a couple of them now, but there are definitely little red flags, little warning signs that our bodies are gearing up for this break, or that we've passed that point of no return in terms of being able to make the adjustments smoothly and seamlessly and, kind of discreetly. So one of those is, I mentioned earlier, like mine was just things kind of sounding weak, like where you just kind of like, even if you're in chest voice, it just doesn't seem right, or you flip into or you move into like an M2, but it just, you can't seem to get any power from it no matter what you try, unless you're like digging in and yelling. Another is that we hear changes to the vowels, for example. Oftentimes, you'll hear this more in males, I think, than in females, because in males, they definitely have a longer chest voice range. And this sort of space between the passaggi is only a fourth as opposed to an octave. So you get these adjustments that happen more rapidly in a less graduated fashion. So with guys in particular, we'll hear a lot of the vowels start to become either distorted or they start to modify toward vowels that have higher first formants. So those are your ahs and ahs and a's, those more belty vowels, and they start to unwittingly modify vowels. The other sign is things becoming increasingly louder, increasingly strident, right? Once you start getting into yell, then you kind of pass that point at which you're going to be able to successfully make that transition, because you're out of balance. Everything's too weighty, too heavy, too pushed, too forced. I know we've talked about just little things like I think those are really the big red flags. I know there's another one I was thinking of too, but not the wobble so much. But So what I find is if we start to become more familiar with our voice and with our scales, as we move up chromatically, we will start to hear and feel those changes. There are changes that happen on every single note, every single half step along the range, but most of us ignore them until they're like really pronounced. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing I want to do today is I want to explore these little graduated changes. So we're going to go through a chromatic scale, and we're just going to do like 5 notes at a time, and we're going to slowly glide from one note to the next. And we're going to pay attention to what is happening with the tone, like the timbre, that's the other one. Is it thinning? Is it brightening? Is it darkening? Generally speaking, it thins and brightens as we move up higher. Is the vowel changing? If I'm singing an ah, does it still sound like a speech ah? Or am I doing something different with it? Or if I'm singing an E, does it still sound like an E, or now does it sound a little bit like an I or an eh? And again, I think those are the kinds of things that we do to cheat. So the goal would be ultimately not to cheat. Yeah, so listening to that and listening to how it feels. Does it feel like you're having to work harder? Does it feel like it's locking into a yell resonance coupling where it just sounds shouty now? So you're going to listen and you're going to feel. So I'm going to start us down lower below what should be the lower passaggio for us. I know Janet is more of a soprano and likes to kind of go a little higher. But we'll start down.
Probably a mezzo, the same as Jamie.
Yeah, I know you're an M2 singer though, like you generally like.
Yeah, well, I struggle not to be, and my first tendency was just to learn to take that break up higher, but then tend to go towards a yell. I'd be interested, because I bet Jamie, because you sing, don't you, different genres, so you already have a strategy that you use.
Yeah.
I'd be really curious, just in a short way, to say how you feel about your break, or
about
whether
my
you're
break?
going to notice.
Yeah, I noticed 2 of them. I've been working, like I have a break between my chest voice and my mix, and then between my mix and my like head voice, and almost like a whistly voice. And so mine is also kind of like a weakness. It used to be when I was really young, my break would be like almost like I would feel the actual vocal switch, like the Cranberries, or Shakira sometimes does it, where it's like
yodel. Sort of
it's the yodel. Yeah. So I've been working on smoothing that out, and then in my higher passaggio, it's just a weaker spot that it's like Karen said, is just like a little bit less power behind it.
Yeah.
And so by working other genres, I try to like pick songs that are pretty expansive as far as the range goes, and then just singing scales and like up and down, as high and low as I can go all the time is helpful for me with my break. But I think with the chromatic tones that we're about to do, it will be also
good.
easy to identify.
Thanks.
Hi, Allison. I'm so sorry. I don't know how long you were waiting there, but it doesn't notify me until like I looked up and I was like, oh my gosh, she's sitting there. So I'm sorry. Allison is also a singing teacher.
Cool.
Hi. Sorry. Hi. I'm sick, so I'm gonna just tune in. I won't probably participate that much except for questions.
Yeah, no problem. Well,
but no, I wasn't that long. I think I looked at the clock and I was like, it's 1:10. So I was here for maybe for just like 5 minutes. So.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. No worries. It's fine.
Oh, yeah, I wish when the first person comes on, I get like a ding, like a notification, and I always expect that I'd get that for everybody, but I don't, and so it's just like this little faint notification.
I've noticed that sometimes with even when I have people online too. I'm like, sometimes it'll tell me in my email, but it won't ding me in, and I'm like, oh, oops.
Yeah, it's really annoying because sometimes I'll be like with a student and I'll be like, oh my gosh, so-and-so is waiting.
Have you guys started talking about, what have you kind of talked about, if you don't mind me asking?
So we've gone through, oh my gosh, that time already. Yeah, so the first thing that we talked about was some of the reasons why we get a break, a vocal break. It's mostly just that we're kind of you can call it static laryngeal function, but it's really just sort of we'll say a failure on our part to make these graduated adjustments to our breath into the muscular balance and you know, a lot of things, the closed quotient, all of those things. So we just kind of, things are falling out of balance. But the big thing is there are warning signs that happen a few notes before the break that we often ignore. Things like, you know, increasing feelings of pressure, the vowels changing, the timbral changes that we notice, the, you know, the feeling of increasing like stridency in the voice. And so we're just getting to the point where we're going to talk about, we're going to go through a little chromatic scale, and we're going to try to pay attention to how things sound and feel. And we're going to listen to what our bodies and our voices are telling us about that point at which we probably need to start making those little minute adjustments in anticipation of that break, so that we don't have the break, so that we can seamlessly glide into more, let's say, a head mix instead of, you know, getting stuck in chest and then having that inevitable break a few notes up.
I find with my teenagers that it's obviously more pronounced. Is it just because of lack of coordination, because their chords are maybe not, their folds just aren't as strong usually? Yeah, okay, that's what I did.
There's that, but especially like the younger teens, the 13, 14-year-olds, their vocal folds, because they're just going through puberty, their vocal folds up until that point have been shorter and thicker. And so, you know, that's why everybody talks about, oh, you know, kids can naturally belt, they can do whatever. And it's like, well, you know, they're yelling on the playground. Well, part of that is, though, that their resonances are higher because their vocal folds are shorter. Of course they can belt up higher. Of course they can yell higher than we can. But it's also very natural for them because of just the structural differences. But as they go through puberty, the vocal folds change and the length of the vocal tract changes and all of that. So yeah, I think it's much more natural for them. And I find that some like pubescent singers, they will stick with more of that heavier production and they'll just kind of keep going with it. And others will really kind of do that, you know, they'll kind of chicken out of that a little bit. And then they'll like, you know, they'll start singing lighter, especially when they go through puberty, because that's when the self-consciousness really starts to kick in. And that was me, right? It was like, you know, okay, sounds sweet and pretty. Oh, toilet paper roll comes out. Oh no.
I don't have tissue. I like need to go to the store.
Oh, I use toilet paper all the time.
It's so annoying.
Oh, it's too bad. All right, so we're going to start with this chromatic scale, and we're just going to sing up through just here. And yeah, whenever you're ready, just mute yourselves. So just the 5 notes. We're going to do it at a time, and then we're going to move up semitone by semitone. Pick any vowel. It doesn't really matter. You'll find that your oohs and e's will probably have you transition.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I was going to say I'll mute you. No offense. So yeah, your oohs and e's will probably they'll ease into the upper register a little bit more easily, more effectively. And then your ahs, you'll probably fight those a little more, and you'll notice they transition ahs, a's, as a little bit later. So let's go through. We'll just any vowel you choose, it doesn't really matter to me. Oh. Yes. So the ahs have the highest first formant. So technically they turn over much, much later. So that's why ahs and a's and as are good belt vowels, because we can stay in chest longer without having to fight physiologically and acoustically. Whereas the e's and oohs have the lowest first formant. So they transition like that. It's the turning over is that relationship between the second harmonic, which is an octave above the fundamental frequency that we're singing, and the first formant of the vowel. So the e's and oohs transition much lower, but then the ahs are here, right? So they've got all this extra space before they have to you know, make a difference. That's why, like, we'll do this in the belting workshop in a couple weeks, I guess it is. We'll talk about belt vowels and non-belt vowels and what you can do about those non-belt vowels, like the oohs. You have to kind of cheat your way through them a little bit and modify them to the point where you can kind of make them sound belty up higher. All right, so let's go back to this. So again, pay attention to the little tiny things. Take your time with the exercise. Pay attention to the feeling of stridency, the vowel changes, timbral changes, tone differences, what your body's just telling you. Are you having to work harder with the breath? What's going on? All right, start here whenever you're ready. Just glide up really smoothly so that you can really feel the shifting, the subtle changes. That's my note. My piano needs to be repaired. Sorry about that. All right, so how are we doing there? Anything that we've observed at this point?
Depends on the vowel.
Are you switching vowels or are you sticking with the same vowel?
I switched.
I switched also. Yeah.
Did you notice any little like cues that your body was giving you?
Yeah, I felt kind of a switch like on the last few higher notes. I felt just a tendency to like switch the placement of my sound. And so it just became much more heady. And like I can dip back and forth into M1 and 2, but yeah, the break is just more pronounced on those higher notes in every vowel.
Did it get louder as well? Or did you feel like a sense, like you said, you felt the resonance shifting? Did you feel like a sense of pressure or work having to happen? Or some people feel like they have to lean into more of like the tilting of the, the cartilages, and like they almost like a cry kind of. I have to cry if I want to stay in an M1 production. I have to cry into my notes above A4.
I felt, yeah, like I could visualize this kind of shifting motion here, but I don't know about cry. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, so, like you have to go.
Yeah.
It's like I'm exaggerating, but there's a little tiny bit of into the sound that kind of, what it does is it thins the vocal folds but keeps them together. So it gives you the compression that you need, but at the same time it doesn't let you weigh the voice down so you don't get stuck in pure chest. So yeah. I use cry when I want to stay in a nice like heavier mix without being an overweight.
Yeah.
So
okay. Because you're kind of moving down from head into chest a little bit. That's what that does?
Well, I have to do it kind of on the ascending pattern. So starting from about A or B flat 4, I have to start leaning into that cry a little bit, because what it does is it just stretches the vocal folds but keeps them compressed. So it doesn't go into like an airy, light production. It stays nice and connected at the glottal level, but then at the same time, it's not really heavy. So I can do something with it. I can manipulate the sound more so than if I'm just like muscling my way up the scale. Yeah. Any thoughts, Janet, or are you good?
We didn't do descending, did we?
Not yet. No.
No.
What
So
I
I
do-
think descending is easier for me. No, no, no. It's just that it's different because I kind of find once I get to the E4, I want to be in a more M2, a more head voice coordination. It's the starting note is all important for me for doing those chromatics. But no, let's carry on.
Yeah, so the descending ones are generally easier, but what happens is we tend to stay in a lighter production and we bring that down. But going up is where I think it kind of betrays us a little bit, because that's where you hear all these tendencies to muscle and push and begin and modify. You don't hear it as much on the descending patterns generally.
But as Alison just mentioned, Estill, which I've gone into quite a bit lately, I always know sort of the surface amount of a lot of things, so not in depth, but very much the Estill teacher I've seen would not want me to go into anything heavy at the bottom. So I always felt it's maybe a bit like, it feels a bit like cheating, just, and then I get confused about, is that actually M1? But I don't want to confuse the issue, so.
Is it, so, because I mentioned the thyroid tilt because I was thinking of that
Yeah.
kind of thing, but could it also be similar to, is it like, I don't know, Karen, if you've done a still or no, it's still, but
I haven't formally, I just would have read online, but yeah, not
Okay.
formally.
yeah. Is it,
Well,
I'm
well,
wondering,
yeah, like Estill is, I believe it was the cricoid tilt, which is the cry, and then it's the thyroid tilt, which is more of the sob.
yeah, that was what I, so it's similar?
Yeah, and
Okay.
but then there was Julianne Case a couple years ago had a video on YouTube where she was speaking to a group of people, and she was actually saying that the research is not really supporting this concept of a tilt, that it doesn't happen quite that way because the muscles that Estill had thought were activating and the cartilages that were activating actually can't, because they don't share the same attachments. I can't remember the details of that.
I've seen and heard some of that like recently too, where it's like some of the research is being challenged or whatever, like specifically on that, and I think on the retraction thing.
The retraction is one too. Yeah, it's like they don't
It's
really.
funny because Dr. Matt Edwards just came out with a blog post, but it was supporting the false vocal fold. Anyway, totally off topic, but he just posted a couple days ago. Anyways, but I was just like, interesting. So I'm like, what do you believe?
Well, I think it's kind of like widening the pharynx, the idea of opening the throat,
Okay.
right? We actually don't have muscles that open the throat,
Right.
because we have constrictor muscles.
Right, and they close.
And yeah, so the only thing we can do is release the constrictor muscles, but we don't have muscles that actually physically widen the throat. And I think it's the same argument has been with the false vocal folds, that it's not, we don't actually have the muscles to retract them. All we can do is we can keep them, yes, exactly. But we can't physically spread them apart. They just don't have those kinds of muscles. It's semantics, I think.
Right.
More than anything.
So when we're going through that break, do you like, we're obvious, like, does the pharyngeal space get smaller though as we travel up in the chest mix?
See, I think it depends, yeah, exactly on how you're singing, right? If you're singing more classically, it's not gonna narrow significantly
Open.
higher up, right? But yeah, like if I notice, so I'm pretty body aware, I'm very kinesthetically aware. And I notice that when I am singing with a lot of twang, because I definitely twangify things more as I go higher. I sing a lot of musical theater. That's kind of my main genre. I used to sing more pop and rock, but I kind of focused a little bit more on musical theater. So there's a lot of twanging happening. I do go into a lot of head mix above my break now, and I feel that sense of pharyngeal narrowing, especially when I'm doing more of like a really a heavier twang, like more of an ethel. Wah, ah, ah. I really feel that narrowing. It doesn't feel bad. It's not constriction. It's
Right,
not,
right. But that would make sense though, I think. I mean, it's not tension, it's just you're narrowing it to get that twang. But when you're in your chest mix, well, can I ask? Sorry, I feel like I'm monopolizing.
No, you're good.
Okay. For twang, is that so? Estelle teaches that it's predominantly in like thin folds for twang. Is that true for chest voice though? Because that's what I thought. You can do your twang in chest voice.
Right. So Tadley Valentine and, oh gosh, I forget her name. So they were on a Nat Cat a couple months ago.
Yep.
I
I remember.
And yeah, I don't know if you saw that where they were get your twang on or whatever it was
I
called.
haven't. It's on my list of things to watch.
Yeah, it's on.
Like, I do twang in chest voice. It's not.
It's a quality, and it's so the interesting thing is so previous research has suggested that twang, and I know we already did the twang workshop, but it suggested that it's all more epilaryngeal. So it's that little laryngeal tube right above the vocal fold that narrows, and they talked about the area epiglottic sphincter, and what we're discovering is it's actually not as sphincter-like as we imagined, and that the muscles of the epiglottis actually aren't connected in the way that they thought to like the arytenoid cartilages. So it's kind of a misnomer now. But what they were suggesting was that twang is something separate from that laryngeal, like upper laryngeal narrowing that we get from like the singer's formant that produces the singer's formant for opera singers, right? But what they're saying is there's a low twang and an upper twang, like a low and a high twang. So the lower twang really has more to do with base of the tongue. So the base of the tongue is what's actually pushing on the epiglottis, which is causing that narrowing. So there's a little, when I do like the etho, wah, wah, there's tongue root, like, but it's not in a bad tongue root way. It's just like, that's what, it's basically narrowing that epilaryngeal opening. But then there's upper twang, which is pharyngeal narrowing. And that's what we're experiencing, and both of them can confirm both through acoustics and like scoping. When people were doing, a lot of singers were doing twang, they both confirmed that there is actually this pharyngeal narrowing that happens, and that's what creates those high frequencies. That's what creates that brightness in the sound, right? Because when you narrow a resonating space, the frequencies are higher, right? The acoustical spectrum tends to shift toward the higher frequency. So that's what I think that's what we're talking about there, is that, yeah, we feel that sense of narrowing because that's actually how the vast majority of us create twang.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with it. And so anyway, so that has nothing to do with really the thickness or thinness of the vocal folds. That's up here, right? That is apart from the vocal folds. So yeah, I have to use twang in my lower range. If I want to get clean, clear notes in my lower chest voice, I have to twang.
Right.
And otherwise, I want to go into that heavy, like foghorn sound. The vocal folds aren't as taut. When I add a bit of twang, it seems to help me get a better connection with the vocal folds and helps to give them a little bit more tension. He got a great auditioning college and also technique.
Oh, they'd asked about Matt's post that I was.
Okay. Yeah. I don't think I think I saw him post something about that article.
Yeah, that was, I think, last week about.
Yes. That's the one, Janet.
Yeah, I read another one of his posts. Excellent. I only discovered him a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He's got a good book on singing rock as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he has a whole contemporary training program.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got to meet him at NATS, which was a conference last year. So yeah, so when you twang, so I think what happens, this is what I believe happens and what seems to be happening with the research. And this is something that which is why I'm bringing up, I'm glad you brought that up, the idea of twang and the idea of cry into those notes. So I teach my students to start crying into their notes when they start to approach this break.
Yeah.
Because it does create that tautness in the vocal folds. It helps keep the vocal folds together without, again, bringing up too much chest voice weight so that there's an imbalance and they end up just really breaking. So when we go up with the twang, I think the same thing happens, is that we're creating that little bit of tautness in the vocal folds. So we're letting them thin, we're letting them stretch so that we can adjust for pitch and register. And the brightness helps to keep things it prevents us from pushing from the throat muscles. I always say, like, it feels like when the sound feels like it's here, you're not placing it there, you're not like aiming it there. But when it feels like it's here, the throat feels passive. That to me is ultimately the objective, is to create this sense of passivity inside the throat, even though it's obviously doing most of the work. And what's happening down here is a lot of work. Oh, I was gonna, something you said earlier, Allison, about this break area. So my first training was with a bel canto teacher. I don't actually sing classical music, and I never really have. He knew that that was not my goal. So he sang in operas, but he also traveled and toured the country in Canada with this cover band. So he did pop and rock. So he was definitely cross-trained, and he came to opera a little bit later than he had the other. But so he was training me with Edward Johnson's technique, basically, the concept of bel canto, what he was learning from him. And in that school, the idea is to train head voice down as low as you can go and chest voice up as high as you can go, with the hopes that at some point there'll be this like sort of intermediate coordination.
Yeah.
I did that for years, and I would bring my head voice down as low as I could, which was usually about G below middle C, and my chest voice, I couldn't get it up very high. G was kind of painful, but I did that for years and years and years. And what I found was all it did was create an imbalance. It didn't add anything to my scale. And I tried doing that with my students early on. Okay, bring your head voice down, bring your chest voice down. But they never found like a true mixed voice. They never found that kind of in-between balance that you need to find leading up to that break area.
So then go ahead, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, so I stopped trying to teach that concept. I mean, I still have them bring it down at times when it's appropriate, but I don't teach it as a means of trying to fix the break.
Okay. Because I've heard both. And I'm trying to determine, now I'm at this point of like, okay, which is the most beneficial and will get them the best results quicker, and that's kind of, I hear, balance. But then I'm like, well, they have up till, an A, B flat, B, C, it's okay in their chest voice. And then, I don't know, but that's interesting you say that, because I was trained, university with opera first. And I was not trained at all to go in my chest voice at all. It was always bring down your head voice, bring it down, bring it down, bring it down. So then when I started singing with my chest voice more, I was like, oh, I have to work a little harder.
Yeah, were you trained as a soprano or mezzo?
Soprano. It's like a coloratura soprano.
Oh, so yeah, so on the higher side. So yeah, generally speaking though, like coloratura repertoire doesn't generally go below a C anyway, right? So I think that the teaching stems from the desire to create this sort of homogeneity of sound.
Right.
And so it just makes it so much easier when you're close to that little transition point anyway. Why not just stay in head voice? Why not just stay in M2, bring that down? There's no point changing registers, right? So I think that's the mentality that's been around. I think that's changed in more recent decades, I think, and we're realizing that having a little bit of chest voice even for soprano is a healthy thing, and it's balance. And it's,
you can't lean into that voice that brought down. You can't make it louder. No.
Right. So yeah, and I recorded a video about this like 3 times, and I never posted it because I was like, oh, I have such a weird video. But yeah, this idea of, do you bring it down and do you bring this up, and does that help? And again, for me, all I did was stick in the vocal folds, but it never helped me find the balance. And then it brought down this lighter, it just got thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner as you go down. And I just never found any kind of balance on those notes between my E and my A, for example. So I just generally don't find it effective, but I do sometimes have students go down if we're trying to work on thinning the upper chest register or something like that. But that's a good point to bring up, though, because I think there are different opinions about how to train this area and how to bridge registers more effectively. There are so many different ways in which we can do this. I think that there's not just one way that works effectively for everybody. I like to do exercises that encourage the vocal tract to stay completely, not fixed, but fixed. Where we're not making any radical adjustments, where sometimes we position the tongue in a certain way. If we're singing a vowel, for example, oftentimes, again, we'll unwittingly modify vowels will change the shape of the vocal tract in one way or the other. So what I like to do is do exercises like the French nasal vowels, or NG, where the tongue is kind of in a fixed position. And while the throat may be making some minor adjustments along the way, essentially we've kind of limited the variables. And when we limit the variables, I think it makes it easier us to focus on the end goal of having a smooth transition, as opposed to throwing in modification and all sorts of stuff. So let's do like an NG exercise here. Again, I'm going to take you below what should theoretically be your lower passaggio, and then up through the break. So we'll take you up into the lower part. We're not going to go super high with this today because I don't think that's really the critical point for us to get to anything above D or E5. So we're just going to do like an NG, so it's that bright ringing ding, ding, that sound there. And when we do this, we want to have the feeling of the NG kind of being more forward. And again, I hate to say forward placement because we're not placing it, but this feeling of it there as opposed to the throat. If we feel it in the throat, generally speaking, we are tensing our tongue root. And we're also going to be kind of cutting off that resonating space in behind the tongue. So I would say if this is like the root of the tongue and this is the tip of the tongue and here's the root of the mouth and your soft palate, we want the tongue high and fronted and kind of sitting on like in front of the soft palate as opposed to behind it. If it's sitting behind it, we end up with a gagged sound. Right, that's tongue root, it's pulled back, and I have no resonating space. I don't have that ring. Is it applicable to male voices as well? Yes, I'm assuming so. Yeah, just exactly different tessitura, but I do the same thing with my male students. We do the same kind of thing. So there's a growing body of research that supports the idea that opening up the nasal port through the passaggio actually is beneficial for the transition. So I know Johan Sundberg, he talked about this at the NATS conference, that he is currently doing some research on nasal resonance through the passaggio, and they studied a number of professional male opera singers, and they all intuitively open up the nasal port just very slightly. Not enough for perceptible nasality, because that's not an acceptable timbre in classical singing, right. But there's a very, very slight opening. And what they're finding is, it's kind of like almost like a pressure release valve, but what they're finding is that that slight bit of nasal resonance that, again, may not even be picked up by the ear, helps to create a positive relationship between the vocal fold resonance and the vocal fold vibration, or vocal tract resonance, right, and vocal fold vibration, so that they start playing more nicely with each other. And when they have this nice acoustic energy feedback happening, the nerve reactance, basically, then the vocal folds start adjusting for pitch and register more effectively. So that's why, and I think even though classical teachers for the past several centuries haven't had the benefit of all the knowledge that we have, nasal resonance has been used in training like it's for centuries. And, you know, my teacher was using it, and that was before the days of the internet, you know, and everybody was using N's and M's and NGs and French nasals and stuff as part of training. And I think that they just intuitively felt that sense of ease going through the passaggio, going through the break area in adding nasal resonance. So, very fascinating.
How do you actually do that?
That's the trick. So what we're going to do is we're going to do like a full-on nasal sound, so the NG. So all the air and resonance are supposed to filter out through the nasal cavity. And we're going to feel that sense of, you know, you should really theoretically feel it here anyway. Somewhere I feel it here usually, sometimes here, because we're actually using the nasal passages as a resonator. So you're going to feel that sense of sympathetic resonance, the vibrations associated with resonance, right? You're going to feel less of it in the mouth because the mouth is effectively closed off by that tongue, kind of filling up that back part of the mouth. So that's going to give us that feeling that we want to aim for. It's going to give us that ring. And then we're going to do a French nasal where we actually have two different resonating bodies at the same time. Well, we're going to filter that air out through both the mouth and the nasal cavity. And that's where it becomes, I think, it brings us closer to being able to apply it to actual real life singing. And then what we can do is we can play around, and we won't do it today, but we can play around with the degree of nasal port opening and have less and less and less of it, and play around with what is the point at which the nasality becomes perceptible. And what is at the point at which I start to lose that feeling of release and resonance here, and I start to feel more of it here. And I know, like, so Allison, you're doing more contemporary stuff these days, right? Yeah, so I think this is more applicable, obviously, to contemporary singing. And Janet does like some more like legit, I know, lyrical musical theater. But yeah, I think this is.
I find that I use like that idea of using some nasal, not a lot, but a little bit for like Disney princess singing. Like that bright kind of head, like Frozen or whatever, because it's like a high larynx, but lifted soft palate, bright kind of.
Yeah, well, even in that case, so the soft palette's not nearly what it is, like as high as what it is,
Right.
though, in classical singing. But if you think of it, right, the soft palette has to be slightly lowered to let that air out there.
Right. Yeah. It's not completely up, but it is. But to get that kind of quality of speech in that, I find that I use that.
Yeah. Good. So much conversation today. I like it. All right, so let's try the NG exercise. So again, the aim is to feel it like here, somewhere there, as opposed to feeling like you're pushing from the throat. The throat should essentially feel passive. You should hear a really nice bright ring, as opposed to like the Kermit the Frog. So we're just gonna do. And it's gonna want to switch between the registers. And the idea is just to kind of keep that consistency in the loudness and the how it feels, like how it's resonating. We don't want to be pulling back, and we don't want to be digging in. Just this feeling of just kind of easing into that. Like I always feel it like kind of hooking more in here as I go higher. And that always helps me create that seamlessness. So you can mute yourselves, and then let's go through this exercise again. We'll go up and then we'll go down with this one. All right, so how do we do with that?
That felt like really easy. The transitions were barely perceptible, and it felt really smooth. Like the break was more acknowledgeable on the lower couple notes that we started on for me.
Allison, I don't think you're singing right. Is your nose stuffy? Yeah.
It's just not gonna work for me today.
That's fine. That's fine. So we'll just, yeah, I won't call on you anymore.
I could do some stuff, but not the nasal stuff. It's just
No.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's going to be more of it today. Janet, how did you do?
Yeah, I'm better at it now. Somehow that I've had an extra bit of understanding. When it gets to a certain level, I'm in a head voice all the way anyway. And, you know, the most useful bit is when it's crossing my, E, F, G. But yeah, it's easier than it has been when we've done this sort of thing in the past. But it's then, how do you incorporate that into your lyrics? That's always my thing. Fine on an exercise.
Right. So we're going to get to that. So I have a video up about the French nasals on my YouTube channel, and I was working with one of my then 12-year-old students, and she's a belter, and she was working on a song for showcase that she was doing, and you can actually see me saying, okay, so we go through the exercise, and I set that top note. It was a French nasal, so like I set the top note is the one that she was struggling through, and we would just go back and forth between the exercise and the lyrics of the song, and you could see, like, you can actually hear an instant difference, which is why I recorded all my lessons with my students, and so I asked for her and her mom's permission to put it up. Normally, I wouldn't post videos of my students on YouTube. I'd like to try to respect their privacy, but it went so well and it worked so effectively, so instantly, that I was like, okay. So if you look that up, just like look up the French nasal vowels on my channel. You'll see me working with Bella, and it's just like an 8-minute section of her, I think, her lesson thing, but you can see how it works, and part of it is just creating that feeling of placement, which I think, even though you're technically not placing things, it's really more about the feeling of placement is really how you're adjusting your vocal tract. So if you're adjusting your vocal tract in a certain way, it's going to have a certain resonance response, and so all you're doing is you're trying to imitate that when you add lyrics into the song. So sometimes it means modifying a little bit or reshaping your vocal tract to create that same sensation and that same ease through there. And sometimes what we'll do is we'll do like an exaggerated kind of version of it. We'll do this intermediate step where let's say we're practicing twang. We'll do like this twang exercise, and then I'll say, no, I want you to take your lyrics and I want you to go all the way to echo. I want you to like go all the way to this sound, do the experimental sound, and it's not going to sound pretty, and it's not going to be a polished, performance-ready sound. But trust me on this, just go with this. And then because their body remembers it, they've got that muscle memory built in. And then what we do is we dial it down. So the same French nasals, you could aim for kind of a nasalized sound, and you can modify your vowels toward, let's say you like the better, you're going to modify them toward like an and it'll sound ugly. It won't sound like a nice, pretty sound, but your body will remember how that feels to coordinate. And then you get rid of the nasality. And it's just, I don't do everything like go straight from this to this. I always have like an intermediate step, make it work more effectively. I don't know what's in the background.
Oh, it's good to meet you.
He's like, oh, great, hi, me. Too good. So, but did everybody you did okay with that, right? For those of you all right, so let's try the French nasals. So we've got un, en, on. So we've got un as in le fin. We've got en as in Jean Valjean. And we've got bon as in, or like on as in bon. That we try. So we've got like the en and the on are back vowels. The en is like ah, but nasalized. The on is like o, but nasalized. And then there's un, which is close to a. So most of us will tend to favor one of those sounds over the others. I like an because, again, as my happy vowel, it's my musical theater vowel. I don't do well with back vowels because my singing tends to be too back, and I've had to work really hard on my back vowels to prevent them from sounding too back. So Anna works really effectively. I feel more of a sense of that happening in your chord resonance. So with this, we want it nice and energized. Oh, again, it had to go. Okay. Yeah, so she did tell me she had to leave at 5 today, so, or well, 10 o'clock her time. So yeah, so we want to let it go through the nose. And what I find is you can, again, vary the degree of nasal port opening. So it can be more or less nasalized. I always say when you're first going through it, just be really honky, let it go into the nose, and let it be super bright and ringy, even if it's not how you're going to sing everything. And as I go higher, when I get to that break area, I always like get even more nasalized through there. And then it just eases that transition. And again, what it does is now you're keeping the factors, the variables, we're limiting the variables a little bit. So we're keeping that feeling of everything being consistently in the same place, in the same shape. We'll try that. So how'd you do with that, Jamie?
It was nice. I like having that sound really placed forward right here. I can feel it here and in my chest the entire way up and down. And I think that's a really good sign because it's like vibrating these resonators here, and I can feel that it's like a true mix for me. I've noticed my break, like with complete nasal, like NG, like with that exercise, my break is in the same place, but it's much less noticeable, at least auditorily. Yeah.
Yeah, and that again, that's that auditory illusion, because we do have a point at which, I mean, all the research supports it, there's a point at which we pass that proverbial baton. But again, what we can do is on either side of that is we can make slight adjustments in preparation to that, so that it's such a little hiccup, it's not even noticeable. Like it's just, it has to happen. Like we can't, I mean, unless we delay it. But it's going to happen. Physiologically, it's an undeniable fact. Acoustically, there are adjustments that happen throughout. And I think that's something too, I know I've talked about this on my YouTube channel, that there are physiological adjustments that take place throughout the scale, but there are also acoustical adjustments. And depending on the vowel that we're singing, we may need to shape things a little bit differently. So if we can adjust the resonance in one way or another, that can also ease that transition. I know, because Allison, your background is more classical, at least early training.
Yeah, it's my training was predominantly classical, but
Yeah. But I'm wondering about like the open voice, closed voice stuff. I don't know how much talk there was of that, because I know with my male students, because it is so much, I feel it's more critical because where the transitions happen and where the turning over point happens. I do work on like a Burton Coffin exercise with them on where they adjust the vowels according to where, like, to kind of ride the open closed um, train as they go along. And I work on that with my non-classical singers because that's another way that I help them transition through this register point where they learn to be able to acoustically close the vowels so that they're not always going into yell, but they're not having to flip. They can stay in full voice.
right.
And they get a little bit, initially they get a little bit of a Pavarotti sound, which is obviously not going to work for rock or pop, right? But
Yeah.
what we do is we just kind of open it slightly without splatting.
Yeah, it's funny because I've definitely experienced that when in my own practice, like when I'm doing more CCM. It was never touched on by my teachers ever. But with me, like in my own kind of exploration and then in my teaching, I've found that to be helpful of adjusting acoustical space. There's one singer I'm working with right now who just loves to splat and it drives me nuts. But I have to tell him, like, you have to adjust it. And that kind of, we've had to change the colors a little bit, and that seemed to help him. He's doing he has a really bright voice and he's singing Old Fashioned Lover Boy by Queen, and he wants to splat it, but I'm like, no, like the ooh love. I have him do more closer to an O because he just can't get that ooh. But when he does a oh love and then modifies it to get closer to the ooh, he's able to get it.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, so well, part of it is, and I know Ken Bozeman has talked about this too, this idea of passive modification versus active modification, where a lot of like teachers that encourage the open voice singing through the whole scale will encourage more active modification toward vowels with higher first formants, generally speaking, more opening of the vocal tract, like more, lowering the jaw, more mouth spreading, what have you, to raise the first formant, let the larynx go up. But with the exercises that we're working on is we stabilize the vocal tract so that we are singing, when we're singing O at the bottom, we're singing O in the middle. We're not changing anything. We're not going we're not modifying, because as soon as you do that, you're shading it toward a higher first formant vowel, which means you're delaying that turning over, right? That second harmonic passing the formant. And Jamie, if you don't understand any of this, please just stop me and I can clarify. I'm very nerdy.
No, that's great. And I have the recording, so I can go into the research later.
All right. Well, so again, I've got videos, like I have an interview with Ken Bozeman on my channel that you can check out if he talks about that. But I have a video that I put out at Medium Search before that, in which I talked about
Okay. So we can go in and find that and learn more, because that's the formant stuff is kind of like, it's not new to me. Like, I understand it, but I would like to understand it better because it just helps you to understand acoustics. And that's the one part I think that I'm really lacking, is kind of vocabulary to describe the formants better.
Yeah, and I think it's great amongst vocal pedagogues. And Jamie's also a new teacher, so
Okay.
Great. What was that?
Very new. This is really great. Thanks.
But I think it's great for us, but with our students, how much they need to understand. Like, I tend to, because of my website and my YouTube channel, I tend to attract the students who are kind of nerdy, geeky. So they actually, I have scientists in my studio, so they like this nerdy stuff. Like they find it helps them to understand things a lot better. But for other students, it's just kind of like, it's more than they need to know.
Yeah.
But what we do is I'm working with this awesome student from the Netherlands right now, and he's only had 6 lessons with me, but he is just awesome. And I'm so excited to work with him. And I'm trying to get him to work on this concept of acoustically closing the voice, not letting everything open and flat. And he's really struggling with it. Like, he's struggling more than any other singer I've worked with to try to get this concept of closing it off. But once they get it, it's kind of like, oh, I got it. So actually for us, if you guys listen to How Far I'll Go from Moana, if you listen to her C5 at the end, How Far I'll Go, He's acoustically closing it off. Another example is Hugh Jackman in The Greatest Showman when they're singing From Now On. You listen to him singing, you can actually hear him going into almost like a classical, it is a kind of classical sound. He overcloses for the style, but he's got the right idea. He's doing that acoustical protection of the voice. It was kind of, I know we're going off in a rabbit hole or a little rabbit trail here.
It's so cool though. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
One of my favorite singers is Chris Daughtry. And if you listen to him singing like Home, the song Home, I'm Going Home, that song, he has some A's and B's, which for a lyric baritone, which is what he is, they're a little bit on the high side for him to be singing completely open voice. They would sell yelly, splatty, right? But he actually, if you listen really closely, he acoustically closes off that just slightly, so he doesn't slap the vowel. And what he just goes into like he just lets the harmonics change, like the resonance relationship change. That's all he's doing. So I bring this up only because this is another method that I use with my students. Is I work on closed voice with them, and especially with the male singers, because I think for them it's the most critical, and because they are most inclined to splat, they're more inclined to muscle their way up the scale. That's where I go with them, and I start teaching them this fairly early on, as long as they have a certain set of skills that we can work with, because it requires a huge amount of athleticism to sing like that. There's some other resources to read about this later. So I guess the Bozeman books, bless you all. I feel bad.
Bless you.
Yeah, the Ken Bozeman books are good, and I mean, I don't know if I would go into like the Bernard and Burton Coffin and what have you, but like the exercise that I do with him is based on Burton Coffin's exercises, and I don't know if you've ever seen his vowel chart. Have you ever seen that? Here, let me see if I can. I'm gonna find it.
I don't know. Maybe I have.
Let me see if I can find the chart. I don't even know where the book is.
My dog is right here.
Hi, puppy.
I don't even know where the book is right now. My bookshelf is back. But so he's got this chart that it's supposed to be like a scale. You're supposed to set it on the piano and you adjust it to where you set it according to your tessiture and your registration transition point, your Saji.
That's cool. Wow.
So we have a little bit higher for soprano and down lower for baritone, you know. And what he has is he describes 7 different registers, but they're like acoustical registers.
Wow.
So if you can experiment with this in your own singing too. So if you like sang, let's say you sang a G, right? And you sang an ah, that note is gonna sound different on an ah than it does on an oo or E.
Mm-hmm.
That's acoustics. Physiologically, you're basically nothing much is different about the production. It's more acoustical because you're on an ah, you haven't hit your formant yet, so you're actually going to be more. Yeah, so you can hear one as e ah e. We tend to go ah. We tend to open it up, right? We don't have to, but we tend to. And you'll notice that. So as we're singing, we'll wonder why sometimes. Okay, why does this not sound right, or why does this sound kind of like yelly, but this note, like when I'm singing the same note on this vowel, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Right. And that's all acoustics. And so this exercise, what it does is like it's I'm going off of like I wasn't planning to go into this, but so he's got this exercise where you start with like E if, so the top note is an if, and the I is acoustically more open than the E. The E, I set it down at like I set it down lower than he does, but I set it down at like an F sharp, a low middle C for guys. But for female, I started about a B. So the E wants to open up, right? But we have to prevent that from happening because we go it'll modify.
Oh, so you don't want to if you over open it, it'll.
Yeah, so if you sing it just like you speak it, E, I. There's a very subtle difference between an E and an I. The tongue lowers and backs a little bit, and then the shape of the mouth becomes a little less spread, but it is so very subtle. But what often happens is, so there's another, like they do the ooh, oh is a good example, right? So if we do a back vowel series, you gotta do it there, and they're gonna go oh, 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 right about there.
What was that?
Right about there is where the vowel turns over naturally. Is around that E, F, around there for a lot of guys. I'm going off on a tangent, I'm sorry. But if they keep everything consistent within the vocal tract, if they keep the vowel exactly like they're supposed to, so if they start with an E, a pure as in like how they form it in speech, and they don't make those adjustments, they don't lower the jaw, they don't change the vowel, they don't modify it, what will happen is the vowel will turn over and they won't get the splat and they won't get the break. But this is like the reason why I don't typically do that in this workshop is because it is kind of an involved thing that takes a little bit of work to kind of take some time to wrap your mind around the concept. But it's basically what Ken Bozeman describes as passive versus active vowel modification. So in active vowel modification, we are changing the vowel. And we're doing it in one way or another. We're doing it either to force the voice to turn over or to stay in open voice and stay in like a chest voice. Right? So we modify, we lower the jaw, we open the mouth, we spread it more, we go more toward a higher first formant vowel, A's, as, ahs. Like, so your O will modify toward an ah, generally speaking. An will modify toward an ah. You tend to want to do that. But if you keep everything consistent within the vocal tract, so your E is E no matter what, same amount of ring in the voice, that nice frontal buzzy sound, the same way of breathing, everything's consistent. Again, you eliminate the variables, so all you have to do is deal with this pitch. What will happen is this modification of the vowel will happen because you're stabilizing the formants. Harmonics are rising above them instead of doing this, rising with. So this is open voice, splat, 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 shortening the vocal tract, raising the first formant. But when you're doing this, you hear that shift that you hear like really pronounced in the Hugh Jackman, you know, when he's singing From Now On. You hear like it sounds this big contained voice. It's not a wimpy voice. It's not falsetto. It's not really head voice. It's more of your classical mixed voice, really. This full sound. That's how Pavarotti got these big sounds without sounding like he's yelling and splatting and belting. He's also not in falsetto. He's not in like a light wimpy head voice. And he's doing it by modifying. That's the acoustical protection of the voice. I know, like, David Jones talks about that too. Like, he calls it the acoustical protection of the voice. It's this idea of, you know, cuperto, turning over.
Does that cover?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you're just vocal. Like, again, I think it's more important and more, like, it's more critical for guys. And it's because it happens at a point in their ranges where they're using it more often too than where it happens for us higher up. We don't use that as much in contemporary singing generally.
Right.
And because they tend to be more muscular and they tend to be more throughout the scale, I think it's more critical. But just because you're both like working on teaching and stuff, that's my other approach that I work on with it. So I do like the French nasals. I do exercises that encourage like a little bit of a thinning in the notes leading up to that break so that everything kind of just blends. The other thing too that, I mean, I know I went off in there, but if you have questions about this, feel free to message me or something later on and we can go into more of it. I can send you some different videos too. But the other thing I want to talk about was closed quotient, which is the amount of time that the vocal folds are touching each other or making contact with each other during each vibratory cycle.
Right.
So when we are in chest voice, because we're using more muscle and we're using more medial compression, so the vocal folds are multiple layers, right? And the parts that vibrate are just this thin ligament. But inside that, we've got muscles that are actually not involved in vibration, but they are involved in compressing this, like bringing the vocal folds together, glottal adduction. So they provide what's called medial compression. So compression from like the middle of the vocal folds. And when we're in chest voice, we use a lot of that medial compression. But as we move up the scale, if we bring that medial compression up to that same extent, that's when we get yell. That's when we get shout.
That makes sense.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So that's why we had that feeling of like increasingly having to like increase, like exert ourselves more or more effort to
Yeah.
kind of hold on to things. But what happens, remember I said I do cry, I do whimper in the voice. Well, there's a reason why I do that, because remember I said it encourages the vocal folds to thin as they naturally want to, but at the same time it keeps the vocal folds together. So when I do that, I get more of a matching of the closed quotient, because usually what happens is when we flip into a falsetto or a head voice, is the closed quotient becomes shortened. So
Okay.
now the vocal folds are not touching each other for as long. They're just kind of touching and coming apart. Whereas in chest voice, it's like, right? So staying
Yeah.
most of the vibratory cycle. But then that's why we also get that sound of it being lighter, of it having less presence, because they're not pressing together as much in a good way. They're just kind of, you get almost like not even necessarily airy, but a sense of it having less substance to it. So it doesn't even have to be audibly airy for it to kind of just be a little bit weaker. So one of the things that I do is I encourage students to work more on matching the levels of closed quotient between the two different registers, right around that transition point. So just before we go, so one of the ways that I do that is that like exercise. You're using like a little bit of a glottal stroke. It's that. It's that feeling there in the throat, and you don't want to dig in. You don't want right? That doesn't feel very good.
Right.
Again, I always go for that feeling of, because it's a hum, right? You should feel vibration here. It's coming through your nose. Yeah. So let's just try that for a second and see what happens. What you'll notice is that that will stay consistent. But what happens is, as you transition, you move from this medial compression provided by the thyroarytenoid muscles to more of the posterior compression that's provided by the lateral cricoarytenoid muscles and the interarytenoid muscles. So if you think of the vocal folds like this, right, and you've got these arytenoid cartilages at the back, so instead of relying as much on this medial compression from within the muscular body of the vocal fold, you're starting to rely more on these muscles that draw the arytenoid cartilages together. And so when I do whimper, that encourages the LCAs, those lateral cricoarytenoid muscles, to bring those together, and they provide compression. Some of those muscles do provide some medial compression as well. So what I feel is when I get to my A, B flat, I feel a changing of the compression. In order for me to hold on to that same, the same closed quotient, or the same like feeling of substance in my voice, I have to change the compression.
So that's the lateral, say it again?
LCAs, lateral cricoarytenoids.
Okay, so then you would do that in your chest voice up as you're approaching your break?
Yep. Yeah, and that's where I start adding cry, because that's exactly what I get. So I watched a webinar with Ingo Tietze, and he actually described it as like, eek! I saw a mouse.
Oh, that's cool.
Right. Vocal folds are pressing together,
Right.
but they're stretching and thinning simultaneously. That's your, it's like, eek, I saw a mouse. That's your LCAs right there. We know how to use them. We don't have to do anything special with them. We just have to like surrender the control from the TAs, the medial compression from the thyroarytenoid muscles.
That's cool.
And let that compression change.
Right.
And I feel a sense of having to work differently, not harder per se, but differently.
I understand that. Yeah. I know for me, especially like this morning, I had to sing worship. I had to lead worship this morning, and I had to be really careful not to over compress. That was really, because I feel like I'm so weighty right now.
Oh, with your, the cool.
Yeah. So in order to do some of the stuff the songs require, I had to use some of that kind of sound.
Yeah. So I find when I do my Ethel, wah, ah,
Mhm.
that activates those LCAs.
Really?
Wah, 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 ah. I can feel that. I can feel how it's compressing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but it's not like babies cry. Wah, 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 wah. It's different.
It's more compressed.
That's more, and it's more.
I can't do it.
Yeah, that's more M2, and it's definitely, I'm not feeling the same compression. Wah! I've got rhythm, like rah, rah, like it's like it or the witch's cat going like it's the same as eek, 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 eek. It's the same mechanism. So learning to like tap into that on the other side of the break in particular, but kind of preparing for it ahead of time. But that's what has helped me to figure out mixed voice through that range, going up to like my E5, trying to figure out how do I navigate that area, like when I've got a lot of C's and D's, and I don't want it to sound like head voice.
Yeah.
And I changed how I compress the sound so that I basically try to match levels of closed quotient from the lower to the higher part.
Could you, by any chance, I know we're running out of time.
No, minutes. I gabbed about something I wasn't planning to.
Could you speak a little bit more on developing a head mix? Because again, my older teenagers, young adults sometimes have trouble with, like what I've noticed, like for newer students in particular, is I'll try to get them to usually I'll use like a uh-oh to get them used to kind of a little bit more closure. But sometimes, like I have one student who just really struggles to get good closed folds and then like more closed quotient in her head mix. But what will happen is it'll kind of just fall apart and become really airy.
Yep, that was me.
Okay, yeah. So because I'm not, and I don't know, I struggle with kind of helping her through that because I'm like, because sometimes she'll say it hurts and I'm like, well, it shouldn't hurt. And you might have too much constriction, if that's the case. But then she's like, well, I feel like I have to do that in order to get it. And I'm like, well, and then I'm like, well, let's play with your breath a little bit. Are you pushing too much air through? Like, and I don't know. I have a hard time teaching that concept sometimes.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in the belt one too, that the biggest mistake that singers make is that they push too much, they drive too much with the breath when it comes to that, because they think it's a big sound. It's got to be heavy, it's got to be full. And so they automatically just try to like increase that, and then there's a response, right, where they increase the pressures from down below. This responds by pressing more and by working harder. And that's like I don't even talk much about breath with it, with my students, even though it's important. I just kind of leave it alone because I believe that the body sort of intuitively figures it out for the most part. And I only address it when I find it doesn't.
I'm kind of the same way too, but I feel like it can get really complicated really fast.
Yeah. But so what we're talking about right now is exactly what I do with those kinds of students and what I did for myself. So it's this, so that the M2 notes have to sound just like same amount of compression, even though you're in a different register. And again, now you're creating the similarities between the two, even though you're still in a different register. So just try that for a second. Let's try it. Actually, I'm going to bring it down here for a second. So let's just try that for a second. So it's sort of like a mezzo staccato. You don't want them just sitting on the note too long because they're going to dig in too much. But the big thing is, you don't want to push, drive with the breath. You don't want to dig into the sound, but you also don't want to go, like a lot of students will go, like you'll hear like an H before it. And those breathy students will do that. And then sometimes it helps if you just do They'll get that more than the hum. And they'll hear when they're going, you can't really do that as easily. I can't add the H as easily with an Yeah, so it works.
Oh, it uses kind of the nasal resonance too.
Well, you have to. But for me, that's where I felt the difference between how I used to sing and the amount of work that I actually had to, like the vocal effort, good vocal effort, that I actually needed to get a mix and a fuller sound.
Sorry.
And you don't have to dig in, right? Like you go into head. It's still like, that's that little glottal stroke. And yeah, it's harder up there. I'm so dry right now. I'm not going.
It's glottal. It's very much glottal.
Yeah, and it's not a hard, like, you're not like slamming.
It's
just enough like the but it's really gentle. It's not like It's
So then,
there. Oh, sorry.
oh no, it's okay. So then, once you get them to do that, then do you have them sustain it, like, or to keep it?
I have a 3-part progression. I actually have this on my channel too. But what I do is
that's where I start, because I'm like, okay, cool, we've got the beginning down, but the sustain is always the tricky part. Too.
Yeah. So I do 3 parts. So I do the staccato, mezzo staccato part first. And once they master that and they can get through that bridging area, they can get through that. I have them slightly sustain the top note in a hum.
Yeah.
But they have to master that first before they move on, though. Because a lot of them want to go and get airy, right? They want to go, so they start with the but then they lose it. Or they'll generally lose it on the way down. And it gets airy, right? And so they have to learn to be able to keep that effort through the whole exercise. And then once they get that, then it becomes it's all the same effort. So you sound a little airy there, but I know you're saying. Yeah, and little tongue root too. You gotta watch the tongue root with that exercise because they'll want to engage it.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's why you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that the feeling that they have to get used to, and the trust in their instrument. Because that was for me. It was the trust. Was like, oh my gosh, that's so much work to make that sound, and I didn't trust my instrument to be able to do it. And it took a little bit of work, and it took a little bit of development of the coordination and the strength for that. And then once I did, it was like, oh my gosh, I love the sounds that I'm making now. I'm like, now they sound like something you'd hear on the radio. Now they sound like something you'd hear on the stage, you know. Before that, it was like, yeah, it was this lighter production, even if it wasn't airy.
Yeah.
It lacked the depth and the fullness and the substance that I heard in other singers.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you.
No,
Yeah.
But that was the other exercise I was going to do anyway.
Awesome.
But yeah, that's my favorite one. Or but they have to do compression.
Okay.
And if they don't, then they go back to the beginning and they go back to just the going through the because you can feel that though as you go through your break, right? You can feel it going from chest voice to head voice, but you're still doing the exact same glottal stroke, which means you're still using the same glottal compression. You're just changing how that compression is created. Right. Now you're using less medial compression from the TAs and more LCA at the back.
Yeah. It's funny because I think back to like when my teacher was training me in college, I would do stuff like that. And she's like, no, you have to be lighter, you know, because she wants to hear. And now, so whenever I feel that, I'm like, ooh, it's too heavy. But no, it's not. It's not too heavy. It's just stylistically, it's a different style.
Yeah. And that's, I'm just the same way. So I'm a chronic undersinger. I have been all my life, again, because there's, you know, very self-conscious about my voice and early criticism. And, you know, even though I was like, long story, but I wasn't a bad singer at all. But it was just an abusive situation, and it was like that. But it impacted me significantly in my relationship with my voice. And, you know, I was always afraid of imposing my noise on other people and just being scared of being loud and working hard at it. So I just grew to really like the sound. This was, you know, it was pretty, it wasn't a weak voice, but it certainly wasn't a strong voice. You know what I mean? Like it was, and getting past that feeling of, oh my gosh, it's more work, and being okay and trusting, oh, my body is built for this.
Right.
Like, I'm not used to it, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad or unhealthy. And that's I think the big, for me, it was a mental hurdle more than a physical hurdle
Yeah.
to be able to like accept those sounds. And then now when I hear them sometimes in my own singing, I'm like, oh, that's what I've been waiting for like 40 years. You know? That's what I've been wanting to have happen, is like, oh, that's the sound right there that I couldn't figure out how to make before because I didn't trust my voice to make it.
Yeah. It's a huge game of trust.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, it is. All right. Any other thoughts or questions before we go?
No, I have a lot to look up. I'm so thankful. Thanks, guys.
I almost wonder if I should kind of erase that whole section about the closed voice, open voice, because that was just like.
No, that's super interesting. And yeah.
It's very interesting, but it is, I always tell my students, it's like it's going to take you a few lessons for you to wrap your mind around the concept. It took me a few lessons for me to like understand what was being asked of me, and then to understand like to recognize the sounds and the sensations of the voice acoustically closing versus acoustically opening. Once I did, I found like it gave me another option. And I'm all about having options. So even though I mostly teach contemporary singers or singers of contemporary styles, I like to give them options so that they know that they can sing that G open or close. Male. I work with a lot with males for some reason. I don't know why. Most of my students are males. But you know, when they're singing a G or an A, it's like, well, they have different options there. You know, we can modify vowels and you can stay open, or we can choose not to modify vowels and let it passively modify and turn over. And then you're going to get a different sound where it's, you know, and if we learn to kind of ride that open close area where it's bright and it kind of sounds speech-like, but you're not splatting. That's the ideal for most pop and rock.
And what do you mean by turnover?
It's that relationship of the first formant of the vowel, which is different for every vowel, and the second harmonic of the sung pitch. So here's the fundamental frequency, the pitch that we recognize or hear.
Yeah.
And an octave above that is the second harmonic.
Yeah.
Starting over is all about the relationship between the second harmonic and the first formant of the vowel. So if we're splatting and we're modifying our vowels, what happens is the pitch goes up and then these two lock into each other. So they're basically at the same frequency. And then we raise the first formant, right? So we modify vowels to higher first formant vowels. We lower our jaws. We shorten our vocal tracts by raising the larynx. And they lock in. They call that like yell resonance coupling. They couple with each other. But in turning over, we do the opposite. We stabilize this first formant by keeping the vowel that we're intending to sing, and by stabilizing the length of the vocal tract. And when that happens, as pitch rises, the second harmonic passes that first formant and it tunes up to higher formant.
Yeah.
There's an acoustical change that you clearly hear. If it's done well, it's very subtle and it sounds awesome. If it's not done well, it sounds like Hugh Jackman
it's all the overtones, right?
Yeah. So you're keeping the vowel exactly the same, and that's the only thing that'll happen. Otherwise, it's flat country.
Okay, sweet. I was wondering about that.
Yeah. Well, if you have any more questions, you can always email me or message me on the Singwise Facebook page or something like that. And
awesome. Cool. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, and I will see you in a couple weeks, Jamie. I don't know if Allison's free that day or not for the belting workshop.
I should be. When is it again?
I think it's in 2 weeks from now, because they're supposed to be a month apart, but I had to reschedule. So
yeah, I think I will. It's weird. Like I have recital next week for my students, and so we have our recital rehearsals on Sundays at 2, and I usually have this at 1. So it's just negotiating all those times has been tricky. But after next week, I won't have it, so I should be able to.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm always around, and I will send this. I'm going to upload this right now, and then I will send it out to you as a copy. I mean, I know, Jamie, you're probably fine. You don't need it because you've got you're recording it for yourself.
Yeah.
But Allison, I'll send this out to you, and I'll send it out to the other people who weren't able to make it today.
Okay.
Cool.
All right.
Nice to meet you both.
Nice to meet you too, Jamie. I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Perfect.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.